It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host Emilio, and this is the Comic Chronicles, the show where we talk about comics normally in a hazy state of mind. So today, as a 4th of July special, I'm doing an episode on a somewhat serious issue, and for that I decided to do it out of respect, completely sober. So today we're going to be doing a review on Superman Smashes the Klan, which is this 3-chapter graphic novel that was just released in May of this year. So this graphic novel is also based on the Superman radio series, which, if you're familiar with Drunk History, they did a whole segment on how the radio show would often infiltrate meetings of the KKK, and the writers of the radio show would then use that to sort of make mockery of the KKK. And through that, they were able to basically just disestablish all this fear that the KKK created, and from that, it sort of helped emphasize the importance of why Superman, who's an alien immigrant, how he was able to basically just destroy white supremacy. And one of the reasons that I enjoyed this graphic novel so much is because it definitely is a period piece set in the 1940s, and it's almost like we're going back in time to when it was actually written. And the way it just emphasizes politics in a lot of their comics is very reminiscent to many of the other comics that were being released at the time, such as the X-Men, and just a lot of the other comics that tackled political issues. And especially seeing someone as iconic as Superman overcome that definitely helped create a sense of patriotism, even though Superman is an alien from Krypton. Alright, so without further ado, let's get started on Superman Smashes the Klan by Jean Luen Yang, with art by Gurihiro. So the first thing we see when we open up the graphic novel is we see Superman punching the Atom Man, who is this Nazi supervillain, and after that Superman is exposed to some type of chemical. It's not really mentioned what it is, but it's presumed to be kryptonite. So after we get a glimpse of Superman fighting the Atom Man, who's this Nazi supervillain, we run into the Lee family, who is this family that moved to Metropolis from Chinatown. And as they're moving, they're met with some subtle racism by the neighborhood. Specifically, there's this interaction with Dr. Lee's coworkers, who makes this reference of giving them a pie, and then he says that they might not be used to it because it's not dog, which is just one of the many things that comes up in the graphic novel about racism towards specifically those of Oriental descent. So then the main character, who's this 8-year-old girl named Roberta, goes with her older brother Tommy, who's 11, and they go to this clubhouse that has a whole bunch of kids from different backgrounds. 3 different religious figures are in charge of this clubhouse, which definitely emphasizes the importance of diversity in the kids. But as the kids, Roberta and Tommy, are trying to make friends by playing baseball, Tommy gets into a fight with one of the white racist kids named Chuck. And Chuck just starts calling him a whole bunch of different slurs, and eventually they get into a fight after Tommy throws a baseball at Chuck and hits him. And Chuck ends up telling his uncle, who's the Grand Scorpion of the Clan of the Burning Cross, which is a direct reference to the Grand Wizard of the KKK. And the Klan decides to burn a cross right on their porch, right in front of their house. And then meanwhile, as this is going on, Superman is dealing with the effect of the crystal, and he begins to have these weird hallucinations that go back to his childhood as he's gaining his powers. So the Lees are not threatened at all, like once the Klan decides to burn a cross. And it does show that the Lees, specifically Dr. Lee, is a bit fearful of the detective who just so happens to be a black man. And so it also shows that it's not necessarily just whites versus those of Asian descent, but there's also some racism within people of other races too. But then after that, the kids just go back to playing in the clubhouse. But then after that, we see Tommy getting kidnapped by these two Klan members. And then the story ends with a cliffhanger where Roberta is with Superman and they're on the hunt to find Tommy. And they also have the help of Chuck to help them. So then, at the beginning of the second chapter, Superman is carrying Roberta and Chuck, the white kid, to find Roberta's brother, who jumped into a river to avoid being tarred by the Klan. And they save him, but Superman is still having trouble with the visions he's seeing. So he still isn't flying, but it becomes more evident in his past that he has the potential to fly when he's having visions of the past where he flew and used his heat vision unintentionally on these kids who were bullying him. The next day, Chuck meets with his uncle, the Grand Scorpion, and apparently there's a bounty for the Klan for $1,000, and Chuck sees his uncle leave with a time bomb. So then Chuck tries warning the kids by taking them to a movie where Roberta feels more out of place after she runs into some of her old friends that she just happened to run into from Chinatown. And as Chuck tells them of the Klan's plan, they rush back to the Unity House because they suspect that it's going to be bombed. And as that's going on, Jimmy Olsen, who's also the aide to Clark Kent, he's a kid in this version, so he runs to tell the Daily Planet, and from there they hope that Superman can help the kids save the priest, the rabbi, and the minister from the Klan before the building blows up. However, the Klan used this as a diversion, as their original plan was to also burn down the Daily Planet. So the second chapter ends with the Klan just holding the Daily Planet hostage, including the chief editor and Lois Lane and a whole bunch of other people that just happen to be in the building. So then the third and final chapter of the series starts with a flashback of Superman where he's at the circus with a friend of his, and as he's there, there's this really strong performer that's on stage, and a fire is accidentally started. The performer is trying to clear out the tent as quickly as possible, but then there's a lion who gets in the way. So the performer is then rescued by Clark Kent, who still hasn't taken on his Superman identity. And afterwards, as Clark's saving the performer tells Clark to wear a costume as a secret identity. And then from there, his parents make him a costume with his original alien symbol as an S. And then after that, it focuses on the Klan's hostages, which are Lois Lane, Inspector Henson, the black detective from the first chapter, and the chief editor of the Daily Planet. So Superman then goes to stop the Klan's fires in the Daily Planet and easily takes down a few of the Klan members, including the Grand Scorpion. The kids, Roberta, Tommy, and Chuck, are also helping, but Chuck's still a bit of a dick trying to protect his family's honor since his uncle's the Grand Scorpion. As Superman takes down the Klan members, Roberta insists on telling Superman he's holding back some of his powers and not being himself completely. So with that, Superman realizes this and finally comes face to face with his real parents, where they explain his origin as a Kryptonian from the planet of Krypton. And then as this is happening, the Grand Scorpion meets with this Grand Mogul, who was also Dr. Lee's boss, and he explains that the whole plan was to create a device that could basically stop Superman, and also just this huge weapon that could take down all of Metropolis. And as the baseball championship is coming around, the Grand Scorpion tries to kill the Lees and Superman is basically confronting the Grand Scorpion while also accepting the fact that he's not from the planet Earth, so he's going to be possibly seen as an outcast towards the end of this graphic novel. So one of the things that I really liked about the graphic novel is the art style that was used on it. It had like this sort of Eastern art appeal that could be seen in manga or animes or even Avatar: The Last Airbender, which isn't really that surprising since the art is done by Gorihiro, who also worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender. And one of the quotes that really stuck out to me through that graphic novel was the one on page 201, where it says, "You think the world is divided by race, but really, it's divided by power." Because it really showed that it had nothing to do with race, it just had to do with trying to stay in as much power as you can, which we definitely see a lot of nowadays. And so, in conclusion, one of the reasons I really loved Superman Smashes the Klan is because it's one of those graphic novels that talks about race that isn't necessarily seen too much nowadays, where it makes very obvious references towards everything that's gone on in the past century and still continues to go on today. And so from that, I hope that it encourages people to not just read comics or just to obsess over superheroes, but also try making a difference in whatever's going on around them, such as the protests going on with the Black Lives Matter, where it's not telling you to just go out and protest, but also help out in any way you can. And especially in an art like comics, where a lot of it can get political, even when people don't want it to get political, I loved how it was so unapologetic in the way it tried presenting itself, and the way it showed racism as clear as daylight instead of having to soften the blows for certain audiences. And especially since the graphic novel was intended for younger audiences, it'll hopefully encourage the younger readers to take a message that racism is definitely going on nowadays, and it needs to be heard from not just the minority, it also needs to be heard from the majority too. So if you can volunteer or donate or help out a cause in any way you can, definitely do so nowadays, because definitely necessary these days to help out your fellow man. So check out the description below, where I'll have a whole bunch of links towards charities that you can donate to, and also check out the works of Jean Luen Yang and Gorihiro. Alright, so that's all I've got right now. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Emilio. Join us next time, where we'll be back to our regular scheduled programming of getting lit and reading comics. As always, support your local comic shop if you can, but more importantly, just support your fellow man in any way you can. And until then, join us next time as we take another hit from our stash. This is the Comic Chronicles.